Have you ever struggled to clearly explain what you stand for or find it hard to get seen? This isn't about polishing your LinkedIn bio or your elevator pitch. This is about you taking one fundamental decision. Who are you not? Because in this noisy world, people don't respond to nuance, but they do remember contrast. That's why global positioning strategist Laura Ries argues that the best way for you or your business to stand out is to have a strategic enemy, to pick the right fight. And she shows how you can use the power of saying, I'm not that, to gain clarity and the recognition you deserve. Laura, you're right that good communication doesn't start with what you want to say. It starts with what the consumer is willing to believe and accept.
Well, that's right. Well, it all stems from positioning, and it is all about the mind of the consumer. And while most people are very concerned about what they want to say, they have to realize it's not going to get in the mind unless you craft it correctly, meaning you want to make it as easy to accept. So, connecting with an idea that's already accepted or putting in a way that it's easily understandable. It could be visualized, for example, using words that are visual is much more easily accepted by the mind. So, crafting your message is very critical.
I totally agree. I mean, my last book is called Message Machine, so you're preaching to the converted. And when I read this in your new book, which is awesome, called The Strategic Enemy, what I thought is, well, that's actually true for all audience and all forms of communications for personal brands, etc. We have to meet people where they are, rather than just talking about the things we want to talk about.
Yeah, and make a radical change. That's pretty shocking and jarring and unlikely to be accepted instead of connecting to something that they already believe and adding on to it. That's a much more effective way to whether you're talking about yourself or talking about a brand. And when you think even about your personal brand, the way you present yourself, would you want to go to a doctor that was, wearing, shorts and flip-flops? You want them to have a doctor coat on.
100%. Orange top hat is a no-go for me when it comes to doctors.
All these things send messages. So, from what you wear to how you look, and that goes for a brand. It's very important. And that's why the logo should be a reflection of what the strategy should be, right? It shouldn't be, just looked upon whether it's attractive or not, because that's not really at the end of the day the most important thing. It's whether or not it's reinforcing the strategy. And that depends on the situation, whether, what brand you are, what category you are, and what your positioning is.
Yeah. Why is positioning important?
Well, it's the mind of the consumer, right? People, that's where things are stored. What is a brand, right? It can be, people have companies, they put names on packages, but unless that brand is understood in the mind and not just as a name, but standing for something. Look at one of the most successful brand launches in the last 10 years, Tesla. The success is not just the Tesla brand. The success is because it dominates and pioneered a new category, and that was electric vehicles. And the pioneering all the news value and PR and what Elon does has driven that brand into the mind of it, made it very, memorable, made it very important because they do dominate that one category.
That's right. Yes. And you write that every brand should have a strategic enemy. Why do we need enemies? Isn't the world hostile enough? Should we just be friends?
We should just be friends. And absolutely, the strategic enemy is not about hate. It's not about saying the other brand is a loser and they're terrible. The idea of the strategic enemy, it's an oppositional force that your brand stands against. The idea is to bring contrast and clarity to your brand by, contrasting it to something that is understandable. So, gasoline cars are a thing. That's fine. That's one category. And Tesla said, we're going to focus on electric, and we're going to talk about the benefits and the differences of electric. And that's what really sets up, the understanding of the mind to be able to, put these things in perspective. And when you can think about that enemy, many strong brands today have done that. One being Liquid Death. There's lots of water brands. Listen, I never thought they could think of a new idea for a water brand, but here comes Liquid Death. And they said, we're not going to do plastic. Most water is consumed in plastic water bottles. They're cheap, right? They're inexpensive, they're easy, they're light, but they're also terrible for the environment. And they're not even being recycled, even though they can be. But they said water in a can. And that was a strategic enemy difference. And it was also environmentally friendly, right? Death to plastics was the message. And, aluminum is infinitely recyclable. But they also combined it with packaging that, talked in made a contrast to say, you can go to a concert, you can be crazy, you can do all these things and still drink water. Many people are choosing not to drink energy drinks, not to drink alcohol, but they still want that connection to the brand. And that's where Liquid Death came in and offered that alternative. Here's the thing. If you don't have a narrow focus, you can't find a strategic enemy. And that's the biggest problem most companies have, is that they're into too many things. They're, line extended, they're into multiple categories, and they can't successfully define a strategic enemy to go against. And when you rally someone against something, it's much easier to get them to fight for you.
And I was chief communicator of an airline called EasyJet in Europe, pretty big, one of the biggest.
Pretty big.
And yes, we grew up fighting Ryanair, which is the Irish, the blue, we're the orange, the British, then the European. So that animosity helped both companies, right? And before our conversation, I thought about, why did we do this? Where did this idea come from of the strategic enemy? And it actually came from everyone in the aviation scene in Britain at the time looked at Richard Branson, what they did with Virgin, right? The Virgin brand, which of course is global and hundreds of companies, etc. But he really, at least as far as I know, really invented that playbook in Europe, at least, to say, all my brands are positioned, to the extent that it has an enemy, whether that's the cinema, whether that's the airline, whether that's, you name it, Virgin Media, Virgin Records, the record label, which then signed this, the punk bands, etc. So it's always about that outsider underdog status positioned as, and rather the big slow incumbent, the non-customer friendly incumbent is positioned as the enemy. So that was the playbook we looked at and then used quite a lot.
Yeah, no, it's an excellent example because listen, the strategic enemy, it can be a competitor, but it also can be another category. It can be a convention. It can be an idea. But it sets up that contrast to more clearly define what you are. I mean, you can then double down and, Branson did it very well on the fun of the airline, right? Being against the boring traditional. And, he went out of his way to do that. The PR, this guy, he'll do anything for PR.
Incredible.
It's absolutely anything. But you also bring up a very good point is that, if you pioneer a new category, like, the low cost airlines, for example, it's actually, when you have competitors, it brings more energy and excitement to the category itself. You shouldn't actually, not want competitors because having, whether, the discussion, and I call it the brand debate between, EasyJet and Ryanair, it gets people talking and they can talk about the differences, the pros and cons of both. I mean, that brings good discussion. And it also then forces good clarity of those brands. And you mentioned the colors. That's incredibly important. When you think about, colors for brands, I call it the visual hammer, right? Something that is visually distinctive out there. And, knowing who that enemy is makes it very clear. You're not going to be blue if Ryan is blue. You've got to be a dramatically different color. And that's going to make you, stand out both visually as well as strategically.
Yes. And the orange color actually came from the founders looking over an airfield, looking at what colors are there. And it's usually at the time was blue and red. So, okay, let's be orange. There's no other orange airline. So
that's the best strategy. Yet that's not what most companies do. Most companies, they get color analysis. Well, blue is corporate. Or what are we trying to communicate? No. How can we differentiate is really the big question out there. And, when you think about, knowing who the enemy is, that is going to force you to differentiate. Also, the power of saying no. Many companies have been built on this concept, not trying to say yes to everybody. To try to say no is sometimes the best way to build a brand, to find your category. Subaru, for example, one of the most dramatic, turnabouts in the automotive industry. How did they do it? Well, while they pioneered four-wheel drive, they never focused on it. They sold both two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive. Now, the thing is that made sense in the market. If you're, customer oriented, you're looking at, in the United States and the North, sure, we got snow, you need four-wheel. In the South, I live in Atlanta. It snows once every 10 years, right? We don't need it. Why should we pay for it? So they were offering both sides. But as a result, the brand didn't stand for anything. And there was no enemy. And, back, they were losing money and they got a new CEO. And he looked at it. And actually, the sales were 52% two-wheel and 48% four-wheel. You know what he did?
Four-wheel drive only.
Four-wheel drive only. Would you get rid of 52% of your sales? Most CEOs would not.
No, unless you're with the back to the wall, right? And that's probably what they felt,
They,
that we
they
have to
were, but
stand for something.
everyone did think they were
Yeah,
crazy for sure. And
yeah.
initially, sales went down, as
Mm.
often they do. I mean, that happens, of course, but you're doing it for the long term, and that's why the CEO is so important. They have to understand the power of focus, and they have to see the long game of where that's going to take you and where that's going to set you up in the future. And that's exactly what happened with Subaru when they,
Yeah.
narrowed down on the four-wheel drive. Then they went all in on it. I mean, very sporty. And they came out with new models like the Outback, and they now stand for something. The outdoorsy, adventure-seeking, type of person that wants and gravitates to being proud Subaru owners. I mean, you can't be a proud owner of something unless it actually stands for something, because then you're trying to communicate things, and that's what brands really do. We make those choices because they have some sort of connection to something we want to feel or experience or solve a problem. And it's just so interesting to me.
Yeah, it's also true for personal brands, right? So you're wearing red, I'm wearing yellow. Hardly a coincidence, right?
Well, no. Well, and here's the thing with brands. It's all about repetition. Repetition is what makes it, more memorable. The more you repeat something, the more believable it is. And when it comes to visuals, you want to stand out. If I wore a different color every day, no one would recognize me. And so I always pick red. I mean, that's my color. I go with it. Now, it's boring. And that's, it's a problem for many people and many
Yeah.
companies. They get bored
Yeah.
with saying, oh, BMW, the ultimate driving machine. I mean, 30, almost 40 years now. I mean, there's no fun in being the creative director.
Yes.
You can't think up a new tagline every, couple years. And that's what most companies do. The more you change, the less memorable you become. Now, you got to find that right strategy. But when you do, when you find your color, when you find your slogan, that battle cry, you got to stick with it. And it can be boring, but it is very effective.
Yeah. Yes. Do you think, I mean, all your thinking and writing about positioning and categories, is that also true for leaders, for personal brands?
Well, sure. I mean, you can think about many leaders also follow this kind of visual hammer idea. You have,
Mm.
Jensen at NVIDIA. He wears a black leather jacket for 20
Yes.
years. 20 years. He's got several of them, but it's his iconic look. And here's the thing. The black leather jacket did not make NVIDIA successful. So don't think you're just going to pick an outfit and that's going to lead to success. But if you become successful, that visual then is representative of the success. So with NVIDIA, it was the graphics chips, it was the GPU, and today it is now the AI chips, and leading the way, and that becomes the visualization of it. The same thing with Steve Jobs and the black turtleneck. The gal at Theranos, she thought she could wear a black turtleneck and people would think she was innovative like Steve Jobs. Well, she was scamming everybody. You can't just wear
Yeah.
a black turtleneck and get instant credibility.
Yes. And also when you think about positioning categories, I think is also true for leaders. Some are positioned as, to say, the crisis here or the turnaround specialist
Right.
or the growth person or the 0 to 1 person. So it does make a lot of sense to think about your own positioning. And that's when I work with leaders also, it's like, what you put under your name on your LinkedIn bio is actually really important because
Oh,
that
yeah.
crystallizes your thinking about how do I want to be perceived in the next 3 words, the couple of seconds people have before they form an image of you.
That's a very important point. And what's interesting about it is, people get very stuck and like, I don't want to be pigeonholed, right? But that's the way to build a brand, to have that narrow focus.
Yes.
Now, listen, it doesn't mean, if you're the crisis CEO, that you can't also manage a company through good times, right? I mean, there's a halo effect. If you're very good at one thing, people will believe you're also good at a lot of other things. The problem is if you're just a little bit, okay at a bunch of things, there's no power in that. So owning one thing is a much better way to go. And then, once you're in the company, you have a long-term relationship, you can expand and people have a, more general understanding. But out there in the world, with all the people and all the things going on, you got to be as narrow as possible to cut through the clutter, to be remembered, to have that one instant thing come to mind. A long paragraph, your long bio is never going to come to mind. Can you own one word? Can it be simple? Can it be different? And then can you have a cool outfit to go with it?
Yes. And
And it doesn't have to be an outfit. Some have like a hairstyle. You could have, yellow
Big glasses.
glasses. Of
Yeah.
course. You can have,
Yeah.
we had a mayor that wore a big flower, button on her thing. It's just a way to be memorable.
Yes.
And that comes through the, being different, being consistent. And, it's actually quite fun.
It's quite fun. Yeah, exactly. So we should see it as something gimmicky. It's fun because we all get bombarded by tens of thousands of messages every day. So,
Oh,
what
yeah.
doesn't stand out is never going to be remembered. Just to sheer quantity, it's just impossible.
Well, and it does have to come from some authenticity. I was reading a post and, about people like trying to create their online persona. No, you don't. You're not trying to create
Don't.
something else. You're trying to bring online your real true self. Now, you may need to focus on one thing that is truly you, but you shouldn't be making something up. That's gonna, people have pretty good BS monitors these days.
Yes.
And in the age of AI, that even gets crazier.
Totally. And I think this is a really important thing, what you just said, that we should bring something of our personality to the forefront when it comes to personal branding and thought leadership, etc. So that needs to be totally authentic and not created. But it isn't everything. Like on this podcast, right, I deeply care about leadership communications and CEO communications, totally authentic.
Yeah.
But if I would also bring all my other interests here, cats, family, handball, you name it, people are like, what's this show about, right?
That's right.
What's this? I want to hear about leadership communications, not about, your cats or whatever. So it needs to have that focus. You bring something, a particular aspect to the forefront, and that helps you cut across.
Well, it's an interesting thought because you have to deal with the size of the market, right? So, go back to Adam Smith. Now, if you're in a small country, for example, most of the companies tend to be less focused, right? Because
Yes.
it's a very small country. Or if you live in a small town, you got one general store, you got one doctor that does everything because, you can't be a specialist. But once you get to the big city, then you find all the specialists. You get to a big country, you find much greater specialization. And it just so happens the larger the country, many times the more successful they are in building global brands because the brands in the United States are pretty focused. They have to be. Think of the European, Union. I mean, they have to be, more narrowly focused. And even, Germany being a very large company, country there, those brands are narrowly focused, and that leads to greater success. So it does, in the world today being online, you have to be more narrowly focused than ever.
That's right. Yeah. And rather compete globally for the number 1 or 2 position in a specific field rather than being these, we had these big conglomerates from Siemens to GE, etc. And that's kind of a thing of the past in a way. And they often split up into different segments.
That was very much, the trend of the last century, right? And
Yes.
with the industrialization and the access to resources and money so critical, and you had one brand, IBM or GE, and you put that name on everything. And, that worked unless you face focused competition. So in the categories where they did, they got hammered. And today we see, the rise of, multi-brand companies. So the strength, you can be a big company, but you want to have different brands for different categories. And even Apple itself, one of the greatest companies in the world, it's not, it's the Apple is the company, but their success is with individual brands that focus and in many cases have pioneered individual categories. iPhone being one of my favorite, right? They pioneered the smartphone. They gave it a great category name because what did that do? It instantly repositioned Nokia, the world leader in cell phones, as a dumb phone. Brilliant.
Strategic enemy.
Of course. I mean, they took, and he also, Jobs saw the future as in the phone, the main function of it wasn't really the phone, it was really a computer. And that's where I think they really leveraged that. And they also looked at the long game. I mean, it took a while for us to, move over to, I had a Crackberry for a long time. I love that little keyboard. But the future of the, interactivity of the iPhone, really being that, mobile internet device was incredibly powerful. But that simple brand name, here's the thing. Categories are the most important, whether it's Red Bull and energy drinks. I go back here. Virgin, yes, they've expanded, but not always very successfully. I mean, they had Virgin Cola, Virgin Vodka. They even had Virgin wedding dresses, if you can believe that. Not sure what the market is for that. But anyway, It's very important that, the category is king, but the name is how we verbalize it. So, the goal is to dominate a category, and that category in the end is usually verbalized by the leader in it. So we say, Red Bull, we say iPhone in these situations. And so you do need a great brand name. It's going to be really helpful in the long term. And if you don't have one, if you make too generic a brand name, that can be a problem. We've got a ride sharing service in the United States. It competes with Uber. Uber, great brand name. Terrific.
Mhm.
It's called
Yeah.
Lyft. Lyft. Lyf. Yeah. Um, Terrible. Lyft.
LYFT, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that it? Yeah. Mhm.
And so LIF, I mean, you want to lift. Yes. I mean, it's a cute, making a generic word that's spelled a little differently. But here's the thing. You don't, brands are written down and logos and such, but they're in the mind. In the mind, it's only
Mhm.
a sound. And the sound sounds exactly the same. That's confusing. You want to make things as easy as possible for people, right? Simple brand names, simple categories, simple contrasts, unique visual hammers that stand out. We want to make it easier, not more difficult.
You're clearly so passionate about this, and obviously you have family history
Mm.
in this field of marketing, advertising,
I
positioning.
do.
How did your father inspire you?
Well, my gosh, how did he not? So yes, my father was Al Ries, and he wrote the book on positioning with his partner Jack Trout, and that it really changed. I mean, how we thought about communication. It wasn't just
Yeah.
communicating out; it was in the mind. And so I was born. Let's see, the year before it kind of got big in the '70s, and so I grew up with positioning, and I was the only child of my dad's second marriage. So in the home, I was the only kid there, and at dinner tables, we talked about marketing. I've got a great story. We used to watch that MASH television show, which was fantastic, but the real
Yes.
show was my dad during the commercial breaks would give running commentary on, what the brands were doing right, or mostly what they were doing wrong and how silly it was. And so, me and my mom were just, we got to hear this from one of the greatest marketers ever. But he would get so angry. I mean, he would, talk to me and my mom as if we were the CEOs and we could actually fix or change these things. Actually, I'm not running cores. I know they should have been the light beer instead of line extending. But so yeah, I loved going to the office with him. Was always fascinated by it. But it didn't really hit me until he wrote the book. I think I was 9. He gave me the book.
What's it called again?
Positioning, the battle for your mind. And actually, I just we do show and tell here. I feel like I'm a kid.
Oh,
Well,
absolutely, we
so
do.
this is
Yes,
the
yes, I
original
remember.
book he gave me
Long time ago.
a long
Mhm.
time ago, very old, signed and everything. Gave it to me at 9 years old. I mean, what does a kid know? I threw it on the bookshelf. I never thought about it. Didn't think my dad was cool. I only thought when I went to the office with him, the art director had like 300 colors of magic markers. That was cool. And the copy machine was cool. But anyhow, in middle school, I don't know why, I picked up the book and I read it. And I was blown away. If anyone out there has read it, it speaks to you. It's simple, it's funny, it's clear. And I just connected with my dad and this idea at a whole new level. And I hear from a lot of people that were just really touched by that book, and it really kind of changed their perspective. And as me as a kid, it changed my relationship with him. And we never said it; it was just kind of unspoken. But I just always wanted to do what he did, and go in that path. But he was very involved in helping me on school projects. And so I would say it was kind of like we played advertising agency, where he was the he was the executive and I was the junior when we do these projects together. And it was always, and I realize now he was really teaching me the principles. So, he loved to
Yeah.
teach, he loved to mentor. And it was the project, especially the presentations. It was, how do we present the ideas? What kind of visuals are we going to use? I mean, listen, in 5th grade, I was bringing in a slide projector and I had slides. In 2nd grade, I had flip charts. It was a nerdy kid, but it taught me, from an early age, the power of of this, way of telling people, of teaching people. And that's really been, that was his passion, right? Teaching people about better marketing, better strategy. And that's what I love to continue to do with all of the, I worked with him almost 30 years. But he passed in 2022 at almost 96. Just and
Wow.
and working until the very end. I mean, this was what he loved to do, and was just he had me run through my visual hammer slides that last week, and he was giving me tips and pointers, and moment I will never forget.
Wow. What a life, what a fulfilled life.
Oh, it's
And
just amazing. Yeah.
obviously, I read the book at many years ago. There are other books that followed,
Mhm.
obviously, a whole series of books. So that it's interesting how relevant they still are even decades later. And it's probably hard to overstate what a watershed moment this book was, because before that, the advertising marketing was all about, here's our product. It's really good because of this thing.
Well,
And
it was even worse than that. It was just about the creativity of the advertising itself. I mean, that was
mm,
the strategic enemy, the original strategic enemy of positioning. And actually, my dad said, he took a very strong stance against creativity, not because he didn't think it was nice, or David Ogilvy, he idolized, of course, but
mm,
taking a stance against creativity made it very clear who the strategic enemy was of positioning, to make positioning more understandable. So creativity for creativity's sake, the thought was, this was the dawn, the Mad Men era of advertising in the 60s, that, if you had money, if you could get a creative agency and make an ad that got people's attention, it would drive success and people to think that your company and your brand was cool and great and everything else. But what happened is the believability of advertising plummeted as it exploded in prominence and everyone was advertising. I mean, what you say about yourself, I hate to tell you, is just not believable, right?
yes.
It's just not.
Yeah.
And
And consumers got inoculated against it, right?
that's
It's the
right.
100th cigarette ad that says, cigarette,
It's good
this
for
is the best
pregnant
cigarette
women.
ever.
Yes, absolutely. No problem.
Yeah.
No, of course. I mean, anything you say about yourself is not believable. That's why, I mean, the essence of positioning, and my dad's original idea was that every ad, and he ran an advertising agency. I mean, that's where he came from, ran it for 30 years, but that every ad should have what he called a rock, an indisputable idea or concept that would be instantly accepted by the consumer, and would allow them to have a connection and believability with your ad. So, for example, they did a Unioil ad, and most ads would say, Unioil makes the best rubber on the road. Well, I mean, that's just what you're saying. Instead, they had a headline that said Unioil has more patents than any other rubber company. I mean, patents was a fact. And so the idea was driving in the perception of, it being an innovative and leadership company by using some indisputable fact with your company. So, I mean,
Mhm.
that was the essence, and, really the dramatic difference, and why, companies today, they need that position of what they stand for. Then advertising is incredibly important, but not the
Yeah.
change of mind. That's what it is very bad at doing. It's very good at reminding you of something you already know. So Coca-Cola says, "We're the real thing." They show the beautiful contour bottle and you say, "Yes, it is. I should have one." You see the BMW, the ultimate driving machine. You say, "Yes, I want a driving machine. I don't want the ultimate sitting machine," which is what they call the strategic enemy, Mercedes-Benz. Now, listen, here's the thing too. With the strategic enemy, it wasn't saying Mercedes was crappy. Of course not. They're the leader, they're the
Yes.
dominant brand, but they're very comfortable. I mean, there's always opportunities to find a weakness in any strength. The comfort, the smooth ride of a Mercedes Benz, that's for some people, but there's always an opportunity to have the opposite, which is the ultimate driving machine.
Yes, if you want to be cool and sporty, then you drive our car. Some people say that we're in a different era now. Scott Galloway, for instance, claims that the era of branding is over, and he qualifies it. So he's not saying branding doesn't matter, but he says that, it's now the times when it was you could have a mediocre product and slap some really good branding
Yeah.
and positioning on it, cool. That worked really well in the 20th century. Now where we can just check, LLMs and Google and ratings and all that stuff, it's more about the product than the branding. How do you see that argument?
Well, I mean, for sure, you can't just have a crappy product and use advertising to promote it and be a success. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And that's getting harder. I think, back in the early days of advertising, that certainly was possible and certainly
Hmm.
did happen. So, he's right a little bit about that. But listen, you know how many decisions you make on a daily basis about buying different brands? Are you going to look up the rating of every, tissue and toilet paper and soap and comb and brush? That would be overwhelming. Our minds can't handle that. The idea of a brand is a shortcut to understanding, to be able to feel good about those choices. So, yes, I mean, I think if you shoddy products will get called out, more than likely. But also, I think that the brand is still an important, and if you can connect it to that, indisputable idea, that will be reflected in the ratings. Because one of the things I do think Reddit is incredibly powerful, setting up the debate of standing for something. And then, you feed your, fans to talk about, the Patagonia jacket, right? That,
Mm.
don't, you could don't buy this jacket, right? You can reuse and, get it fixed, and all of these concepts that reinforce that fan base to make them fight for you and make them talk about you, but giving them the script as to what it is. Another brand we have here is called the Farmer's Dog, and they're, one of many companies that are pioneering, fresh human grade food, or it's not fresh, it's lightly cooked human grade food for dogs, and they have a subscription business. But it's very important, not just they talk about, why you should have this, and the ratings are great online, but how do we get people to buy it? First, we got to unsell them for what they're currently doing. And they've set
Hmm.
up that strategic enemy, not by naming a name, but by saying burnt brown balls with dry dog food are highly processed, and you shouldn't eat highly processed food for every meal of your life. Neither should your dog. And that very strongly communicated, what you shouldn't do, which instantly set up what you should do, is buy Farmer's Dog, and they go long live dogs and talk about longevity. And also that narrow focus on dogs alone made that message, instantly, differentiating from another competitor called Fresh Pet. Fresh Pet. That's a category. Believe it
Yeah.
or not, that's the brand name. Not very memorable. Unfortunately, if, someone asked my husband, What do you feed your lovely poodle Cocoa Puff? Do you feed him Fresh Pet?" And of course, we feed her that. We buy Farmer's Dog. And she goes
That's
by
so
all the
good.
pronouns. I just use them all.
Yeah.
When you're home, you just call the dogs and kids by all names.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you're absolutely right. It really depends what we're talking about. I think he makes a good point. I hugely respect his work.
Yeah,
So
of course.
for sure. And when you think about something like ChatGPT, when it came up and became the first software or the fastest software to reach 1 million users, that wasn't built on great branding or advertising. It was built on an awesome product that no one else had, at least for a little while. Now, when you think about washing powder, when you think about personal brands as well, actually, I think personal brands are on the rise, and they will be for some time, because we don't know what we can trust online anymore.
Yeah.
It's very hard to distinguish, what's actually going on in the world. So we
Yeah,
look towards
most of the
people to,
reviews look fake or,
yeah,
done by bots. But let me just jump in on one thing
yeah.
on ChatGPT, because that's a very good example. Because it wasn't a brand. The most important thing is if you can be first in a new category. I mean,
Mhm.
that's where the strategy is. Now, that if you combine it with a good brand, with a name that's more memorable, that's going to greatly help you. But the real success is being just that, because now we have a bunch of competing companies. But
Yeah.
ChatGPT, by being first, by getting all the word of mouth, by getting all the PR, was able to get a great head start, much like Tesla did in electric vehicles, by going out and being first on that, and then combining it with a brand name. It becomes then very challenging to compete against them, because you've got to set up, how could we be different? I mean, Claude, for example, says, its AI is private, right? We're not going to share
Mhm.
it. That's a unique differentiating idea that sets up the basis for their brand positioning. And go back to Google itself. I mean, they weren't the first search engine, but they were the first that focused only on search. And to really, visualize and show people that that's all they did, they had a white, empty search, a website page with just the one little search thing. I mean, a brilliant way to, visually communicate their emphasis on search only.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. I kind of think that everything has to line up these days, right? You
Yes,
have to have a
yes.
strong brand, you have to have great product, because most businesses will not be successful. It's very hard to get distribution, even if you have a good product. So, to stack the chances in your favor, you want to have a strong brand and a strong marketing, advertising, communication, personal branding, and a great product.
I mean, otherwise, you could just hire Kim Kardashian to promote it and, any brand could be famous. It's just not so. Celebrities are great, but when they have credibility with the product, then we have magic. And that is exactly what Kim Kardashian has done with her Skims, but, shapewear line. She's, promoted a lot of things over the years. So she jokes she, at the same time, was promoting cupcakes as a weight loss pill. So it was all over the place. But here, Skims, had a first in a new category, if you will. The strategic enemy was, Spanx, which was the pioneer in shapewear. But, the difference with Skims was the inclusivity of colors. See, every person isn't beige, and that's what Spanx were always beige, but with
Okay.
Skims, she has the range of colors, the range of sizes, and of course now her celebrity greatly helps bring that message because it's so true to her. If we want to think of shapewear and have a shape to look up to, she definitely has a nice one.
Yeah, and I think that this is a great example because both of these brands are so closely tied to the personal brands of the founders, Kim Kardashian and Sarah Blakely,
Yes,
in the case of Spanx, right? Well, you say Spanx, people usually, at least the customers, would associate the brand with her.
yes.
And it just shows that the sort of the personal branding aspect is so important.
And Spanx is still an incredibly strong brand. And I love Sarah Blakely. And, it's interesting too what she, did with the history of that brand. So listen, shapewear girdles, there's been a lot of products for centuries, right? That help women suck and tuck and all those things. But her brilliant idea, and it wasn't initially positioned as shapewear. What she did was she said, control top pantyhose were very nice, but she didn't want the hose. So she cut off the bottom and she just had the control top and it had no lines, no seams. And that was her unique difference. And initially it was, footless pantyhose was the category. And what did
Yeah.
that do? That showed what the contrast, what the enemy was regular pantyhose. So you don't want those, you want footless pantyhose. And that set off and is, now understood as shapewear, but it was that initial very specific category that set up the enemy. That's what built that brand. And of course, a terrific name.
Yeah.
Spanx is way better even than Skims.
It is a great. So much went into that, and it's a super inspirational story. What's your view on brand extensions? Should ChatGPT come up with fragrances or motorcycles, something?
No. Well, brand line extension is a dangerous game. And so, while you see, Virgin, for example, was able, and they some of their businesses are successful. We're not sure how a lot of them are, but, Richard Branson and his PR out there, was getting attention. But here's the thing, a brand is most powerful when it stands for the category itself. When you put that one brand on multiple categories, it messes with the mind. You no
Yeah.
longer can say, I call it the shopping list test. Put down a list of things for your, spouse or friend or husband to buy and see what they come back with. We had a brand here called Scott. It was the pioneer in toilet paper, but then they had Scott tissues, Scott toilet papers, Scott napkins, Scott paper towels. You put Scott on the list. What does it stand for? You put Kraft on the list. What are you going to buy? Brands that are powerful like Kleenex, right? Like Kleenex is tissues, Bounty is paper towels. Those became dominant leaders in the individual categories. So, think about the power of what that brand is. And we see, we've got numerous, disastrous examples. One latest one, Coke launched Coke Life. Did you hear about that one?
In your book.
Yeah. Well, it's a fun, the Coke. So, for many years, Coke has been kind of chasing this mythical mid-calorie soda. So they
Hmm.
know that regular Coke has too much sugar, too much calories, and that the Coke Zero or Diet Coke in the day was, too much artificial stuff. And so what if we had a mid-calorie? And they had C2 was one, total loser. Because listen, that nature favors the extremes, right? So either you want
Yes.
the real thing or you want no calories. And it could be the same buyer. Sometimes I want to enjoy a Coke and sometimes I want a zero. So,
Absolutely.
and in the middle, the one Coke for everything, forget it.
Yeah.
And so Coke Life was their newest iteration. It was going to be better because it had cane sugar and stevia, the latest and greatest in sweeteners. And even worse, or maybe, they thought good, they put it in a green bottle to communicate how, healthy it was. I mean, forget it. I mean, your brand is so entrenched and so meaningful for one core
Why
idea,
mess with it?
you can't change a mind. But what's really interesting, and it's since been discontinued, but what's really interesting is that we do have the rise of some healthier soda, but it's not a line extension. It's new brands for the new category. And that's Olipop, right? And Poppy.
Mhm.
And these brands are they're going like crazy. They call it prebiotic soda. They add a little prebiotics, a little fiber, but they're positioned as that healthy soda. But it's with a healthy brand, right? That stands for it. So
Yes.
you buy a Poppy, you grab a Olipop, and it stands for something. It's not a weak line extension of something else.
Yeah. But can it work? Are there examples where brand extensions work?
Um, here's the thing. Whenever we get asked this is what people instantly listen to. And they grab the piece of paper and they say, oh boy, they just can't wait to line extend. And that's the danger. That you have to
Yes.
think about when you line extend, you're putting yourself at risk. You're watering down your brand. Now, listen, if you're as strong as Amazon or as strong as Google, maybe you can do that. But most companies are not in this position. Most companies can't do that. They're trying to build their brand. They're trying to, expand their market. And that's where the danger comes in. And why, you should think about the opportunity to launch second brands. For example, Gap, one of our, great
Mhm.
retailers. Well, they had an idea to launch Old Navy, right? Lower cost, but more fashionable, approachable clothing. They didn't call it Gap Warehouse. And actually they thought about it. But you would think, that's what most companies, how do we leverage that brand? How do we put it on something else to get people excited, and take advantage? It undermines, it makes it, if you had Gap Warehouse, then Warehouse, it looks like cheap Gap, and the real Gap looks like it's too expensive. It's a
Yeah.
lose-lose situation. But now they have multiple brands. So now Old Navy, dominant, actually is the majority of the revenue now. Because why? Is that brand so great? No, that category took off, right?
Yeah.
Affordable, trendy clothing, where Zara, was there, and that now you have Old Navy, and now you have Shen, the online fast fashion version. There's so many great examples, and it's the category and the brand that owns and stands for that category is in the best position.
Absolutely. That is so true. And yet we see so many bland and boring brands. How do you explain this?
Because many times, and it's big companies, they don't like risk. And they're trying to appeal to everyone. And over time, also, I think those line extensions can water down your opportunity to stand for something, to have an enemy. I mean, even think about, well, one great example is, Swiffer from Procter and Gamble. I mean, this was unusual that they come up with such a new, exciting brand, because they looked at this technology of a mop you can wet and use, disposable type of pads and such. They saw this in Japan, and they said, we need to do this. Most companies would have said, what brand do we have that we can leverage to do this? Like Mr. Clean, right? They would have a Mr. Clean sweeper. But that's the wrong strategy. The
Yeah.
better strategy was a new brand with a totally new name that set up and built a totally new category we didn't even know we needed. What's funny is that SC Johnson also had and saw the same thing in Japan. They also came out at the very same time, the very same product, but they didn't give it a new name. They used their Pledge brand, and they used the Pledge Grab It. Now, I don't know about you and your house. I don't Pledge grab anything. I Swiffer my house.
That's yeah. It's a mystery. To some extent, it's a mystery. But then, if you know how decisions are made in corporations, then it's often by committee. It's low risk, etc.
It's risk, but it's also something they fall in love with their brand. I mean, there's the old saying that, if you want to influence somebody, Dale Carnegie, right? You repeat their brand name, you mention it often, it flatters people. There's nothing as sweet as the sound of someone's own brand or personal name. But I think in a company, it's the brand name. So, if you're working at Porsche, everything should be Porsche. The idea that we should launch a new brand for electric vehicles would be, seen as, heresy. I mean, it would be awful, right? That would not fly at a company because you're trying to stay loyal to the company. But you have to think strategically and in a positioning mindset that second brand has a lot of opportunities and advantages because it allows them each to be focused and potentially even compete for itself long term. And that's the best strategy. And that can save companies. If you think about, what led to the demise of Kodak was not taking advantage of a second brand. It wasn't that they didn't have the technology. They had the first digital
They
camera.
invented it, yeah.
They
yeah.
invented
They
it.
invented digital photography.
Everyone said, oh, their technology wasn't good. No, the branding was bad. Meaning if they had put a different name on it, the way Toyota did with Lexus, right? I mean, that even though everyone, at the back of their mind knows that Toyota makes a Lexus, that second brand, the second dealership sets up enough separation so that mentally we can feel that it is its own brand and feel, that it is distinctive. But even though the company owns both.
Yes, yeah, that is such a good point. And I mean, we mentioned a few examples here that where branding, positioning didn't go well. Let's say I maneuver myself in such a corner. Can I get out of it? Can I change things and turn things around, or should I just go for a fresh start?
Well, it depends. You think about, Jaguar, maybe. Things were going down. They really just, threw away what they had and started with pink. That was a little too radical. Now, you got to think about what you have. Is there something we can many times narrow the focus on? Is our positioning problem that we don't stand for anything, that we have a bunch of things? And a lot of my consulting work is just that, working with companies. They've got a bunch of little things going on, but we got to find the one thing. If we focus all the resources on that one thing, we can make that one thing a big deal, make the brand and company stand for that. Most people spend most of their time fixing the losers. Right? Now, this is not like raising children. You don't have to treat all of the products you have the same. You can get rid of some and focus on the ones that, have the most advantage. And sometimes, there are opportunities to pivot, but you need to do so early and you need to be the pioneer. Netflix is a great example. Netflix was, CDs of movies that they mailed to you, and it was great to go against Blockbuster. There were no late fees. It was subscription based. It gave you movie recommendations. But what happened? The internet happened. And they just didn't wait around like Blockbuster did, rake it in the cash. At the end, companies like that rake in the cash before the big change happens. And so Netflix early on got into streaming. They were first. And so they slowly built that. And then one day they flipped the anchor, as I say, and it didn't end the DVDs, but they no longer talked about it, no longer promoted it, and switched everything to the streaming focus. NVIDIA did the same when they made the early on switch back in 2012 to say we're an AI technology and chip company. And that was because they were first. Today, they're seen as the dominant leader.
Yes, and the most valuable company in the world. So you say that went pretty well.
It
Also
went
by
pretty
saying
well.
saying no to lots and lots of things. There's actually a whole chapter in your book on NVIDIA, which is a great case study.
Such a great case. And it takes an enormous amount of courage. And that is something that is a challenge for big companies, while you see entrepreneurs that are full of courage. And when they can get all those pieces right, because to your point, it is about having a revolutionary product or service, about the name, about the visual. You got to have the PR, the spokesperson. All these things have to work together. And that's when the magic happens.
That's when the magic happens. Wow, this is so fun, Laura. And I could talk to you for hours. And there's so many wonderful case studies in the book. So it's highly entertaining. And you learn actually quite a lot about branding and positioning. And the same thing as someone who's written a few books myself on this stuff. So where can people keep up with everything you're doing?
Well, absolutely. I just launched on Substack. So super excited. I've got newsletters.
Nice.
I've got a hotline that companies call. It's not plugged in, but I take fake calls from companies and I give them advice when they make mistakes. So check it out. It's Ries.news for the newsletter, or Ries.com. You can find everything about me, and strategicenemy.com. Check out the book. Thank you for saying that, but it was so fun to write because I love the stories. I love looking at companies, what they do right, what they do wrong, and how people can learn and really apply these things today to make their brand, their positioning stronger and better.
Absolutely. We link to that in the
Yeah.
notes below. There's always my final question. What's your best piece of communications advice?
The best piece is to repeat something someone already believes.
Yes.
Don't try to get them. It's much harder to try to tell them something new. They're going to reject it. They put their walls up. Repeat something that they already believe or hook to it in some way, like the smartphone did.
Absolutely. This is so overlooked and such a powerful piece of advice, right?
Yeah.
Tell people the story they tell themselves. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. But most people try to persuade people of their story. Here's the snag though. If you don't believe that, right? If your beliefs are different from what the customer, the audience thinks, how do you deal with that?
Well, then you have to get, you have to establish your own credibility. I mean, that's the key to branding. It's not, you don't use advertising to build your brand. You use, PR, word of mouth. It's what other people say about you. Listen, me coming on saying my book is great, no one's going to believe that. But when you say it's great, when the
It's the
endorsers,
truth.
when the
Fact.
reviewers say it's great, and,
Yeah.
the people that read it and post on Amazon, that's where the credibility comes in. And then it's reinforced by, what my message is, all those other things. But, that is first and foremost. You need other people. Third-party endorsement is what is going to convince people. And then you can remind them.
Absolutely. Laura Ries, The Strategic Enemy. Thank you so much. That was awesome. And I love chatting with you. Thanks for all the good work you're doing. Much appreciated. And we link to everything down there.